My name is Dr. Ethan Cross, and I need to tell you what happened in the Arabian Sea 3 months ago before they find me. I'm a marine archaeologist with a doctorate in Near Eastern Studies from the University of Chicago. The kind of person who spent 15 years of his career believing everything had a rational explanation. I've excavated Phoenician shipwrecks off the coast of Lebanon, mapped submerged Bronze Age settlements in the Aegean, and published papers debunking sensationalist claims about Noah's Ark ancient texts were metaphors. I told my students supernatural events were primitive people misunderstanding natural phenomena. The Book of Revelation was political allegory, not prophecy. I was so certain of my worldview, so confident in the supremacy of empirical evidence over superstition. I was catastrophically wrong about all of it. And now I'm running out of time to warn anyone who will listen. For 4 years, I worked for an organization called Covenant Research Institute, headquartered in a nondescript office building in Northern Virginia that could have housed any mid-sized tech company. Most people have never heard of them, which was intentional. We were privately funded by a consortium of religious institutions and wealthy individuals who believed that faith and science weren't opposing forces but complementary tools for understanding truth. Our mission was to investigate the unexplained phenomena with biblical or historical religious connections, using cutting-edge technology to either verify or debunk claims that straddled the line between archaeology and theology. The work was fascinating in an academic sense. We'd analyze satellite imagery to verify flood narratives through sediment deposits, use ground-penetrating radar to search for lost cities mentioned in ancient texts, map trade routes described in Leviticus, and compare them to actual Bronze Age commerce patterns. We'd investigate claims of discovered Ark fragments on Mount Ararat, usually debunking them within hours. We published papers in peer-reviewed journals, presented at conferences, maintained respectability in academic circles despite our unconventional funding sources. It was methodical, careful work that rarely challenged my fundamental assumptions about reality. The closest we'd come to anything genuinely inexplicable was a geomagnetic anomaly near the Dead Sea that turned out to be a previously unknown salt dome, and some unusual bacterial colonies in the Red Sea that exhibited extremal characteristics, but nothing supernatural. After 4 years, I'd started to think of the Institute as a well-funded exercise in confirming that biblical miracles had natural explanations, that faith and empirical observation occupied separate magisteria that never truly intersected. That comfortable certainty shattered on a Thursday night in mid-November when Dr. Rebecca Ashford called me at 10:17 p.m. Rebecca directed the Institute, a brilliant oceanographer in her early 50s who'd left a tenure position at Woods Hole to run CRI. She had steel-gray hair she kept in a perpetually messy bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of measured temperament that never showed emotion unless the situation absolutely demanded it. In 4 years, I'd never heard panic in her voice until that night. "Ethan, I need you at the facility immediately," she said without preamble. "We have a situation that can't wait until morning." "What kind of situation?" "The kind I won't discuss over the phone. How quickly can you get here?" I lived in Arlington, 20 minutes from the facility in good traffic. I made it in 15, running 2 red lights. The security was noticeably tighter when I arrived. Instead of waving me through the gate with a friendly nod, the guard checked my ID 3 times, made me submit to a retinal scan we'd never used before, and radioed ahead for clearance. 2 more checkpoints inside the building, both manned by security personnel I'd never seen before, both armed with something more serious than the usual holstered sidearms. Rebecca met me in the secure briefing room on the 3rd subble, a windowless space designed for classified discussions. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally pristine appearance had given way to rumpled clothing and an empty coffee cup collection that suggested she'd been living in this room. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice tight with controlled stress. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest level. You'll need to sign an NDA before we proceed. I signed. She pulled up satellite imagery on the room's main display. A wall-sized screen that showed the Arabian Sea in false color thermal imaging. This appeared 12 days ago, she said, pointing to a perfect circle of blue amid warmer reds and oranges. The boundary was geometrically precise and naturally so. 5 mi in diameter, centered at coordinates 17. 3 degrees north, 61.7 degrees east, approximately 180 mi southwest of Msira Island, Oman. Surface temperature dropped 15 degrees C in less than 6 hours. No storm activity, no upwelling patterns that would explain it, no seasonal variation, just a sudden localized temperature anomaly that formed overnight and has remained stable since. I studied the image. Cold spots in the ocean weren't unusual, but the perfectly circular boundary was troubling. Could be a deep current bringing up cold water, maybe volcanic activity cooling the surface layers. That was our initial hypothesis. She swiped to the next image. This one showing gravitational field measurements from the Grace satellite system. A deep purple depression marked the same coordinates. The color gradient indicating significant deviation from normal, but this changed our assessment. There's a measurable gravitational distortion at these coordinates. Something is pulling downward with enough force to affect satellite telemetry from orbit. I leaned closer. The distortion was significant, beyond anything I'd seen from underwater landslides or tectonic shifts. What could cause that kind of anomaly? We don't know, but it gets worse. She pulled up biometric data, sonar scans of the ocean floor. According to every map we have, the seafloor at these coordinates should be at approximately 930 ft, standard depth for this region of the Arabian Sea. But when we tasked a research vessel to conduct detailed sonar mapping 3 days ago, we got something impossible. The sonar image showed a normal seafloor topology, and then in the center of the cold zone, nothing, just empty space where the ocean floor should be. The depth readings descended past 2,000 ft, 3,000, 4,000, with no return signal indicating solid ground. Equipment malfunction, I suggested, though my voice lacked conviction. 3 separate sonar systems, Ethan, 2 from our vessel, 1 from a French oceanographic survey ship that happened to be in the region. All 3 confirmed the same thing. The seafloor is dropped away or was never there to begin with, and we can't determine how deep it actually goes because our equipment can't reach the bottom. She overlaid the coordinates on an ancient map, one I recognized immediately. It was a reconstruction of the world as described in the Book of Enoch, complete with notations in Aramaic and Hebrew indicating the locations of significant events from the text. The cold zone coordinates aligned almost perfectly with a notation that read, in ancient Hebrew, "Here the deep opens." Here the watchers were cast down. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Rebecca, the Book of Enoch is apocryphal. It's not even in the biblical canon. Most scholars consider it religious fiction, mythology designed to explain the origins of evil. I'm aware of the scholarly consensus, Ethan. I'm also aware that the Ethiopic Orthodox Church considers it canonical scripture, that fragments were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that early church fathers like Tertullian and Origen quoted it as authoritative. But more importantly, I'm aware that we have a physical anomaly at the exact coordinates described in a 2,000-year-old text, and I need to know what we're dealing with. She pulled up another document. This one, a personnel file. 12 days ago, the Royal Geographic Society dispatched the HMS Aldridge to investigate the anomaly. It's a research vessel crew of 23 equipped with state-of-the-art deep-sea exploration equipment. They reached the coordinates 9 days ago and began preliminary surveys. She paused and I could see her choosing her next words carefully. They stopped transmitting 7 days ago. Complete communications blackout. Their last message was a routine check-in, nothing indicating distress or equipment problems. Then silence. The British government sent a surveillance aircraft yesterday. The ship is still there floating in the center of the cold zone, but no one responded to radio hails. Could be a communications failure, I said, though I was already seeing where this was going. The Japanese thought the same thing. The Nippon Foundation for Deep Sea Research sent the Akatsuki Maru 3 days after the British vessel. They reached the coordinates 8 days ago. She pulled up another file. They went silent 6 days ago. Same pattern, routine communications, then nothing. 2 separate research vessels, different nations. Both vanished while investigating the same coordinates. The room felt colder. What do you want me to do? Lead an expedition. You have 10 days to assemble a team and prepare. We've chartered a research vessel, the Covenant Explorer, and secured access to the latest deep-sea exploration technology. I want you to investigate this anomaly, determine what happened to those crews, and find out what we're actually dealing with. And if it's just a natural phenomenon, underwater cavern, unusual tectonic formation, something perfectly explainable, then we document it, publish our findings, and move on to the next mystery. She met my eyes, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her expression. Fear. But Ethan, I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've investigated hundreds of claims, debunked dozens of supposed miracles, and I've never encountered anything that genuinely challenged my understanding of natural law. This feels different. The precision of the circular boundary, the gravitational distortion, the missing seafloor, and the fact that 2 research teams vanished investigating it. I think we're looking at something significant, and I need someone I trust to find out what. Over the next 10 days, I assembled my team, pulling from the Institute's roster of specialists and reaching out to colleagues whose expertise matched our needs. Rebecca would accompany us as mission director and primary data analyst. Her expertise in oceanography and her authority within the Institute made her presence non-negotiable. Liam O'Sullivan came recommended through a former colleague at MIT. He was 43, a deep-sea engineer who'd spent 12 years with the Navy's Deep Submergence Unit before going private. He piloted submersibles to depths most people couldn't imagine, including 3 trips to the Mariana Trench. He was quiet, competent, and had the kind of calm demeanor you wanted in someone responsible for keeping you alive 6 miles underwater. He spoke with a faint Irish accent that became more pronounced when he was concentrating, a quirk I'd later come to recognize as a sign. He was genuinely concerned about something. Father Isaiah Costas was perhaps our most unusual team member, but his expertise was invaluable. He was a Greek Orthodox priest in his early 60s, originally from Thessaloniki, with a doctorate in ancient languages from Oxford and a specialization in apocryphal and pseudopograph texts. He'd spent 30 years studying the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and other intertestamental literature that most biblical scholars dismissed as interesting but non-authoritative. He had a gentle demeanor, a philosopher's careful way of speaking, an unsettling depth of knowledge about pre-Christian Jewish mysticism. He also happened to be fluent in Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, Coptic, and Ges, the ancient Ethiopic language in which the most complete version of Uno had been preserved. Dr. Priya Kandel handled our geophysical analysis. She was 36, originally from Nepal, with a PhD in seismology from Caltech and a decade of experience studying underwater tectonic activity. She'd been part of the team that mapped the Java Trench in unprecedented detail and had published groundbreaking work on deep ocean earthquake mechanics. She was brilliant, direct to the point of bluntness, and had exactly 0 patience for speculation, unsupported by data. If anyone could find a natural explanation for the anomaly, it was Priya. Nathan Torres rounded out our team as equipment specialist and security consultant. 41 years old, former Army Ranger with 2 tours in Afghanistan and specialized training in hostile environment operations. After leaving the military, he'd worked private security for research teams operating in dangerous regions. He was there to manage our equipment, coordinate logistics, and handle any security situations that might arise. He was built like someone who took fitness seriously, had a dry sense of humor, and treated every situation with professional calm that I found reassuring. We departed from Muscat, Oman on a Monday morning under clear skies. The Covenant Explorer was a converted oceanographic research vessel, 160 ft long, equipped with the latest deep-sea exploration technology, including a submersible rated for depths up to 12,000 ft. The crew was professional, experienced in scientific expeditions, and had been thoroughly vetted by the Institute security team. The journey to the coordinates would take approximately 3 days at cruising speed, giving us time to review our mission parameters, test equipment, and prepare for whatever we might find. The first day at sea was routine enough. The crew was friendly, the weather fair, and the ship ran smoothly. We spent most of the day reviewing satellite data, discussing approach strategies, and running equipment checks. Father Costas gave an informal briefing on the Book of Enoch that evening in the ship's small conference room, providing context for what the ancient text actually said about the Watchers and their imprisonment. The Book of Enoch was written sometime between 300 BCE and 100 CE. He began pulling up a timeline on his laptop. It's actually a compilation of several distinct texts written over centuries, but the section relevant to our mission is called the Book of the Watchers. Generally dated to the 3rd century BCE, it expands on a cryptic passage from Genesis 6, Es 1:4, which mentions that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, took wives from among them, and produced the Nephilim, the giants. He pulled up the original Hebrew text. The passage is strange, fragmentary, and most biblical scholars treat it as mythology borrowed from earlier Near Eastern traditions. But Enoch tells the complete story. According to the text, 200 angels called Watchers, whose job was to watch over and guide humanity, descended to earth at Mount Hermon in northern Israel. This isn't metaphorical. The text is geographically specific. Mount Hermon is a real mountain over 9,000 ft tall, straddling the border between modern Syria and Lebanon. Father Costas showed us photographs of Mount Hermon, snow-capped peaks rising above the landscape. The text says the Watchers gathered at the summit and swore an oath together, binding themselves by a mutual curse to follow through with their plan to take human wives. That's why the mountain is called Hermon, from the Hebrew word her meaning sacred pledge or oath. They knew they were rebelling against heaven, and they bound themselves together so none could back out. What happened after they descended? Priya asked. They took human wives and produced offspring called the Nephilim. The text describes these beings as giants. Some versions saying they were 300 cubits tall, roughly 450 ft, though most scholars think that's hyperbole. The Nephilim were violent, consumed vast amounts of food, and when that ran out, they turned to cannibalism, eating both humans and each other. Meanwhile, the Watchers taught humanity forbidden knowledge. He pulled up a list. Azel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, essentially the technology of warfare. Simiaza taught enchantments and root cutting, essentially sorcery and pharmacology. Amoros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barasul taught astrology. Kababel taught the signs of the earth. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. The list goes on. The point is that they accelerated human technological and intellectual development far beyond what should have been natural, corrupting humanity with knowledge we weren't ready to use responsibly. And their punishment. I asked, when God saw what had happened, how the Watchers had corrupted humanity and how the Nephilim were destroying the earth, he sent the archangels to deal with them. Gabriel was commanded to incite the Nephilim against each other, to make them destroy themselves in war. Raphael was sent to bind the leader Azel a hand and foot, cast him into a wilderness place called Judiel, cover him with rough and jagged rocks, and leave him in darkness until the day of judgment, when he would be cast into fire. Michael was commanded to bind Semiaza and the other Watchers in the valleys of the earth for 70 generations, until they would be led away to the abyss of fire for eternal imprisonment. He paused, letting that sink in. The text is very specific, about the geography of their imprisonment. They were bound in valleys beneath the earth, in places associated with deep waters. Enoch describes visiting these prison sites during a mystical journey where angels showed him the structure of creation. In chapter 18, he describes seeing a place that had no firmament of heaven above and no firmly founded earth beneath. A waste and horrible place where 7 stars representing the 7 chief watchers were bound like great burning mountains. He was told this place was the end of heaven and earth, a prison for the stars and the host of heaven. You think the anomaly we're investigating is one of these prison sites? Nathan said it wasn't a question. I think the coordinates align too precisely to be coincidence. Father Costas replied carefully. Ancient Hebrew cosmology conceived of the universe in layers. Heaven above, earth in the middle, the waters of the deep beneath the earth, and below that, the primordial abyss. The same word used in Genesis 1:2 to describe the deep over which the Spirit of God hovered before creation began. Most scholars interpret this as mythology. But what if it was geography? What if the abyss is an actual location? A place where the normal structure of reality is different, where the barriers between dimensions are thinner. That's a hell of a leap from ancient cosmology to modern physics. Priya said skeptically, perhaps, but consider this. We have a measurable gravitational anomaly at coordinates that match an ancient text description of a prison for rebellious angels. We have a missing seafloor, as if the earth beneath the waters has dropped away into nothing. We have 2 research vessels that went silent after investigating the site. I'm not saying the ancient text is literally accurate in every detail, but I am saying that something is there. Something that ancient people tried to describe with the conceptual framework they had available. The second day at sea, things started to go wrong. It began with small equipment malfunctions. The GPS system would show our coordinates accurately one moment, then drift randomly the next, showing us miles off course before snapping back to the correct position. The ship's compass became unreliable, the needle spinning lazily rather than pointing true north. We'd calibrate it, and within an hour, it would drift again. The radio communications with the mainland became intermittent. We'd be talking to the Institute's operations center in clear audio. Then the signal would dissolve into static, but it wasn't just static. If you listen carefully, there seemed to be patterns in the noise, almost like voices whispering beneath the white noise. Our communications officer, a veteran sailor named Rodriguez, spent hours trying to filter out the interference without success. It's like there's something broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously, he said, frustration evident in his voice. But there's no source. It's just ambient noise that shouldn't be there. The crew started to change. Sailors who'd been friendly and talkative the first day became withdrawn, nervous. Conversations at meals grew quieter, more strained. I noticed several crew members crossing themselves when they thought no one was watching. And the ship's small chapel, usually empty except for Sunday services, had people in it at all hours. Liam spent most of the second day running diagnostics on our submersible, a Covenant Descent. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, a titanium hull deep-sea vehicle designed for depths up to 12,000 ft. It could accommodate 4 people, had redundant life support systems, high-intensity LED lights, robotic arms for sample collection, and enough battery power for 72 hours of operation. He found nothing wrong with it, but he kept checking anyway, running through his pre-flight checklist with a kind of obsessive thoroughness that suggested he was more worried than he was letting on. Father Costas spent most of his time in the ship's small library, surrounded by printouts of ancient manuscripts. I found him there the second evening, hunched over his laptop with a dozen reference books spread across the table. Tell me more about the Watchers, I said, sitting down across from him. The specific details. What exactly did they do that was so terrible it required eternal imprisonment? He looked up, his dark eyes troubled behind his reading glasses. The surface reading is that they taught forbidden knowledge and produced the Nephilim, but there's a deeper layer to it. According to Enoch, The Watchers didn't just teach humanity random facts. They revealed secrets that were supposed to remain hidden until humanity was ready for them. They gave us fire before we understood its dangers, medicine before we understood biology, weapons before we understood peace, astrology before we understood our place in the cosmos. Knowledge itself was the sin. Knowledge without wisdom, yes, knowledge without the moral and spiritual development to use it responsibly. Think about it in modern terms. Imagine giving nuclear weapons technology to Bronze Age civilizations. The knowledge itself isn't evil, but humanity wasn't ready for it. The Watchers accelerated our development in ways that corrupted our natural evolution. They created a civilization so advanced and so violent that God chose to cleanse the world with the flood rather than let it continue. But the flood didn't destroy the Watchers. No, they were imprisoned before the flood, bound in darkness beneath the earth to await final judgment. The Nephilim were destroyed when the waters came, but the Watchers themselves remained in their prisons. According to the text, they'll stay there for 70 generations, and then they'll be led to the abyss of fire for eternal torment. How long is 70 generations? Depends on how you calculate it. If you use the ancient standard of 40 years per generation, that's 2,800 years. If you use the genealogies in Genesis as a guide, which sometimes use 100-year generations, it could be 7,000 years. The point is, the imprisonment is temporary. They're not being held there forever. They're being held until an appointed time, and then they'll be moved to their final destination. What appointed time? Father Costas closed his laptop slowly. The text doesn't specify. It uses phrases like "until the day of judgment" and "when the stars align wrong." That's always been interpreted as referring to the end times, the final judgment described in Revelation. But Ethan, what if it's not metaphorical? What if there's an actual moment in time when these prisons are supposed to open? What if that's what we're witnessing? Before I could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Dr. Cross, Dr. Ashford requests your presence on the bridge immediately. I found Rebecca standing at the navigation station, staring at the radar screen with Liam beside her. Her face was pale. "We're 20 m from the anomaly zone," she said without preamble, "and we're picking up something on radar." The screen showed 2 contacts stationary right at the edge of the cold zone coordinates. "Ships?" I asked. "That's what we thought initially, but they're not moving at all." Perfect dead stop. No drift, no engine signature, and they're at the exact coordinates where the Aldridge and the Akatsuki Maru should be. We found them the next day at 2:47 in the afternoon, exactly where the radar had indicated. 2 research vessels floating in water so still it looked like glass. The transition from normal ocean to the anomaly zone was sharp enough to see. We crossed an invisible boundary, and suddenly the waves just stopped. The ocean became perfectly calm, mirror smooth, stretching in a circle approximately 6 mi in diameter. Beyond the edge of the circle, we could see normal waves and currents, but inside the boundary, the water was dead. The sky above us turned gray, not cloudy, just gray, like someone had desaturated the color. The sun was still visible, but it looked dimmer, more distant. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I could see my breath when I exhaled. "This is impossible," Liam said quietly, staring at the boundary behind us where normal ocean ended and dead calm began. "Water doesn't behave like this. Currents, wind, thermal variation, tidal forces, they all create movement. You can't have a perfect circle of calm unless something is actively suppressing wave formation, and I don't know of any natural force that could do that." Priya was frantically taking readings. "The ocean floor is wrong. According to my barometric sonar, we should be at about 930 FT here, but I'm getting return signals that suggest depths over 5,000 FT. And in some areas, no return at all. The sonar just keeps reading deeper with no seafloor detected." The abandoned ships floated like ghosts 200 YD ahead of us. The HMS Aldridge was a modern research vessel, sleek and well-maintained, British flag hanging limp in the still air. The Akatsuki Maru was slightly smaller, a Japanese oceanographic survey ship. Both appeared structurally intact. No visible damage, no signs of fire or collision. They just sat there in the dead water, empty and silent. "Nathan, Liam, suit up," Rebecca ordered. "We're boarding the Aldridge. I want to know what happened to that crew." They took an inflatable boat across the still water, weapons drawn, though none of us could articulate what threat we expected. I watched through binoculars as they climbed aboard the British vessel, disappearing into the superstructure. They were gone for 37 minutes. When they returned, both men looked shaken in a way that combat veterans shouldn't be shaken. "No one aboard," Nathan reported, his voice carefully controlled. "But everything's been left behind. Personal effects, laptops, research equipment, food in the galley, coffee cups on tables in the mess hall. It's like the entire crew just vanished in the middle of whatever they were doing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence or panic. They just aren't there anymore." "Found this in the captain's quarters," Liam said, holding up a leather-bound log book. Captain Richard Petton's personal log. Last entry is dated 7 days ago. He opened it to show us. The handwriting deteriorated across the pages, from neat professional script to desperate scroll that looked like it had been written by someone whose hands were shaking violently. The entries painted a horrifying picture. The Aldridge had arrived at the coordinates 9 days earlier and immediately detected the shaft, a perfectly circular opening in the seafloor, approximately 400 ft in diameter. Captain Petton had been cautious, wanting to conduct thorough surface surveys before attempting any deep-sea investigation, but the mission's chief scientist, a Dr. Leonard Chen, had insisted on immediate exploration. Against the captain's recommendation, Chen and 3 other crew members had descended in the ship's submersible. They'd reported finding symbols on the walls of the shaft, writing in an unknown language. They descended to over 3,000 ft, transmitting increasingly excited reports about what they were seeing. Then their communications became erratic, filled with static and strange audio artifacts. When the submersible returned, Chen was unconscious. The other 3 crew members were unresponsive, staring at nothing, their pupils dilated. The ship's medical officer examined them and found no physical injuries, no signs of decompression sickness or equipment malfunction. Chen died 3 hours later. The medical officer listed the cause as cardiac arrest, but noted that Chen's heart had been perfectly healthy in his last physical examination 2 weeks earlier. The other 3 crew members locked themselves in their quarters. The captain could hear them through the doors whispering to each other, but they weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking any language the captain recognized, and according to the personnel files, none of them spoke anything but English and basic conversational French. The next entry was written in handwriting that barely resembled the earlier script. November 24th, 8:47 a.m. The 3 who went down are gone. The doors to their quarters were locked from the inside, but when we broke them open this morning, the cabins were empty. No one saw them leave, no one heard anything. We've searched the entire ship. They're simply not here anymore, but we see them in the water. All of us have seen them, shapes moving beneath the surface, keeping pace with the ship. They're not whales or fish, they're something else. Something that shouldn't exist. Dr. Patel thinks we're experiencing mass hallucination, shared psychosis brought on by stress and the strange environment. But I've been at sea for 23 years. I know the difference between seeing something and imagining it. They're watching us from below, and they're rising. The final entries became increasingly incoherent, the handwriting degenerating into scroll that was barely legible. November 24th, 11:32 p.m. Most of the crew has abandoned ship. They took both life rafts and the remaining inflatable. I tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen. They said staying on the ship was suicide, that we needed to get out of the dead zone before it was too late. I can't abandon the Aldridge. I'm the captain. This is my ship. I'm alone now. I can hear them moving in the water below me. I can feel them watching. We shouldn't have come here. This place isn't meant for human eyes. The symbols in the shaft were a warning, not an invitation. Dr. Chen read them wrong. He thought they were describing knowledge, secrets waiting to be uncovered. But Father O'Brien, our chaplain, who went down in the first lifeboat, said they were something else. A seal, a binding, a lock on a door that was never meant to be opened. God forgive us, we were wrong to come here. The final entry was a single word written so forcefully the pen had torn through the paper, descending. Below it, in what looked like a different hand entirely, more symbols. The same style of writing we'd seen in the photographs Chen's team had transmitted from inside the shaft before their communications cut out. Father Costas examined the symbols carefully, photographing them from multiple angles. This is Proto-Semitic script, pre-uniform, similar to what we see in very early Ardean texts, but older, much older. I can't read it fluently, but I recognize some of the characters. This symbol here means bound or imprisoned. This one is similar to the Hebrew word for watcher or guardian. And this sequence appears to be a name, Azazel. I think we spent the rest of that day photographing evidence from both ships, documenting everything we found. The Japanese vessel told a similar story, though the final log entries were in Japanese that Priya translated for us. Same pattern. Descent into the shaft, crew members returning changed, deaths from no apparent cause, people vanishing from locked rooms, and finally, abandonment by the surviving crew. That evening, we convened in the Covenant Explorers conference room to discuss our next steps. The debate lasted for hours. Nathan argued we should abort the mission immediately. 2 complete research teams vanished or died investigating this thing. We have clear evidence that descending into that shaft produces catastrophic psychological and physiological effects. The smart play is to return to port, report our findings, and let someone with military resources handle it, and tell them what Rebecca counted, that we found weird weather and some abandoned ships. That won't get military intervention. It'll get a meteorology team and a Coast Guard investigation. Whatever is happening here, it's beyond normal science. We need to understand it before we can explain it to anyone who might be able to help. We came here to investigate an anomaly. Priya said, we found an anomaly, a significant one. The missing seafloor alone is worth extensive study, but I agree with Nathan that the human cost might be too high. If descending into that shaft causes the effects we've seen, we shouldn't risk it. Liam had been quiet throughout the discussion. Finally, he spoke up. I've done hundreds of deep-sea dives in my career. I've been to the Mariana Trench 3 times. I know what equipment failure looks like, what decompression sickness does to people, what psychological stress does to crews in confined spaces. What happened to those teams doesn't match any of that. Whatever affected them came from exposure to something down there, but here's the thing, they went down unprepared. They had no idea what they were looking for. We do. We have context they didn't have. We know about the Book of Enoch, about the supposed prison for the Watchers. If we're careful, if we're prepared for psychological effects, we might be able to learn something without suffering their fate. Father Costas had been praying quietly in Greek throughout the discussion. Now he looked up, his expression grave but determined. Enoch saw this place, he said quietly. According to the text, he was taken by angels on a mystical journey to witness the structure of creation, including the prisons where the rebellious Watchers were bound. In 18:12:6, he describes it specifically. Let me read it to you. He pulled up the text on his tablet, the Gear A's original, alongside an English translation. And beyond that abyss, I saw a place which had no firmament of the heaven above, and no firmly founded earth beneath it. There was no water upon it, and no birds, but it was a waste and horrible place. I saw their 7 stars like great burning mountains, and to me, when I inquired regarding them, the angel said, "This place is the end of heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the host of heaven. And the stars which roll over the fire are they which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in the beginning of their rising, because they did not come forth at their appointed times. And he was wroth with them and bound them till the time when their guilt should be consummated, even for 10,000 years. He looked around the table, a place with no firmament above and no firm earth beneath, a void, a waste, and horrible place. That's what we're seeing here. The missing seafloor, the gravitational anomaly, the dead zone where normal physical laws seem suspended. If this is the place Enoch described, then we're looking at something that predates human civilization by millennia, something that was deliberately sealed away and hidden. The question isn't whether we should investigate. The question is whether we can afford not to. If this seal is weakening, if whatever is imprisoned here is starting to break free, we need to understand what we are dealing with. Rebecca made the final call. We descend. Tomorrow morning, first light. Ethan, me, Liam, and Father Costas. 4-person crew, we investigate the shaft, collect photographic evidence and samples, and return. Total dive time not to exceed 6 hours. Priya and Nathan monitor from the surface, maintain constant communication, and initiate emergency extraction protocols if we don't surface on schedule. None of us slept well that night. I lay in my bunk, listening to the silence. The normal ocean sounds were absent. No waves against the hull, no creaking of the ship, just dead quiet that felt oppressive, suffocating. At 6:45 the next morning, we suited up and entered the Covenant descent. The submersible was cramped with 4 people, but it felt reassuring to have solid titanium walls between us and whatever waited below. Liam ran through his pre-flight checklist with methodical precision, testing every system twice. Father Costas clutched a small leather-bound prayer book, his lips moving silently. Rebecca was already taking notes, documenting every step of the process. I checked my camera equipment, making sure I had enough memory cards and backup batteries. Seal check complete, Liam announced. Life support systems nominal. Battery at full charge. We are ready for descent. The crane lowered us into the water at 7:03 a.m. The submersible settled into the ocean with barely a ripple. The dead, calm water accepted us without resistance. Beginning descent, Liam said, his voice taking on the calm, professional tone of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Descent rate 200 ft per minute. Current depth 30 ft and descending. The water around us was that same impossible clarity we'd seen from the surface. Visibility extended in all directions, far beyond what should be possible. The morning sunlight penetrated deeper than natural physics allowed, creating an eerie twilight that made the ocean feel like a vast, empty cathedral. At 500 ft, we encountered the first fish. They were swimming in circles, dozens of them, moving in a perfect spiral around our descent path. Not avoiding us, not fleeing, just circling endlessly in formation like they were trapped in some invisible current. That's unusual behavior, Rebecca noted, filming them through the port. That's impossible behavior, Priya's voice came through the comm system. Those are different species. Tuna, mackerel, a few sharks. They don't school together, and they don't maintain that kind of precise formation naturally. At 1000 ft, the fish were gone. We descended through water so clear it looked like air, like we were falling through empty space rather than ocean. At 1500 ft, our lights illuminated the shaft. It opened beneath us like the throat of some immense creature, perfectly circular, approximately 400 ft in diameter, just as the British crew had reported. But they hadn't adequately described what it looked like. The walls were smooth as polished glass, descending into darkness beyond the reach of our lights, and they were covered, every inch of them, in symbols. The script spiraled downward in continuous bands like the threads of a massive screw. The characters were intricate, beautiful in an alien way, and they seemed to shimmer slightly in our lights as if they weren't quite three-dimensional. My God, Father Costas breathed, pressing his face close to the viewing port. Can you read it? I asked. I can recognize individual characters, but the grammar is unlike anything I've studied. This is Proto-Semitic script, but it predates any known examples by centuries, possibly millennia. Give me a moment. Liam maneuvered us closer to the wall, bringing us within 10 ft of the surface. I could see now why the symbols seemed to shimmer. They weren't carved into the stone. They were part of the stone itself, as if the molecular structure of the rock had been altered to form writing. There were no tool marks, no evidence of chiseling or engraving. The symbols existed as naturally as the rock's crystalline structure. This section here, Father Costa said, photographing frantically, I can make out some of it. Here lie the watchers who left their station. This word means bound or imprisoned. And this phrase sealed by the voice of the Most High until the appointed time. This is a warning or perhaps a declaration telling anyone who finds this place what it contains. We're entering the shaft. Liam announced, depth 1600 FT and descending. Everyone stay calm and report any unusual sensations immediately. The descent through the shaft felt like falling into another world. The walls rose around us, covered in their spiral of ancient script. Father Costas continued translating what he could, his voice becoming increasingly strained. The 7 who fell, the 200 who followed, bound in darkness until the stars align wrong. When the seals break, they rise. When they rise, judgment comes. The knowledge they brought corrupted the first age. The children they sired consumed the earth. They taught war to the peaceful, sorcery to the innocent, lust to the pure. They will do so again if they escape. Depth 3000 FT, Liam reported. Pressure readings are anomalous. We should be experiencing approximately 1,300 psi at this depth, but the gauge reads only 400 psi. Either the instrument is malfunctioning or the pressure environment is inconsistent with depth. Check the backup systems, Rebecca said already did. Both primary and secondary pressure systems agree. 400 psi at 3,000 FT. That's impossible, but that's what we're reading. At 4,000 FT, the discrepancy between depth and pressure became more pronounced. We should have been experiencing over 1,700 psi. The gauge read 300 psi. It's like we're in a bubble, Liam said, like something is actively reducing the pressure around us. Or we're not actually where the instruments say we are, I suggested. What do you mean? Look at the walls. We've been descending for 27 minutes at a steady 200 FT per minute. That's 5,400 FT, but look at the walls. They don't look any different than they did at 2,000 FT. Same clarity of the stone, same visibility. If we were really at this depth, it should be pitch black except for our lights. But I can see the walls clearly 30 FT away without the lights hitting them directly. Rebecca checked her instruments. Ethan's right. The ambient light level hasn't decreased proportionally with depth. We should be in absolute darkness by now, but there's still illumination from somewhere. At what our instruments claimed was 5,200 FT. Though none of us believed that number anymore, the shaft suddenly opened into space. The beam of our lights couldn't find a far wall. Liam slowed our descent, playing the lights across what we could see. We were in an enormous chamber, roughly spherical based on the curvature of the walls. We could make out rough estimate, 1/2 mile in diameter. Jesus Christ, Liam whispered. Move us toward the floor, Rebecca ordered. Slowly we descended through the vast space, our lights inadequate to fully illuminate it. Gradually, the floor came into view. It was perfectly flat, smooth as polished obsidian, made of black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And at what appeared to be the center of the chamber stood a structure that made my breath stop. 7 massive pillars arranged in a perfect circle, each at least 100 FT tall and perhaps 15 FT in diameter. They were carved from the same black stone as the floor. And even from a distance, I could see they were covered in intricate carvings. Between the pillars, the floor was different. Darker still, if that was possible, and as our lights played across it, the surface seemed to move, ripple, like water pretending to be stone or stone pretending to be water. Set us down near the pillars, Rebecca said. 20 FT out from the nearest one. Rebecca, we don't know. I started, we came here to investigate, that's what we're doing. Liam, land us. He brought the Covenant descent down with gentle precision, the landing struts touching the blackstone floor with barely a tremor. We sat in silence for a moment, staring out at the pillars. The chamber wasn't silent. There was a sound, or maybe a feeling, a vibration that resonated through the hull and into our bones. A subsonic frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly at the edges. Everyone feel that? Liam asked. We all did. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was deeply uncomfortable, like standing too close to massive speakers playing bass notes below the threshold of hearing. Father Costas was staring up at the pillars, his face pale. Look at the tops, the symbols. Each pillar bore a massive carving at its peak. Characters at least 12 ft high, cut deep into the stone. Even from our position on the floor, I could make them out clearly. Samyaza, Father Costas read, his voice barely above a whisper. Arzil, Amaros, Barakal, Kauibal, Ezekiel, Asbiel, the 7 chiefs, the 7 leaders of the 200 watchers. This is their prison, this is where they were bound. Rebecca was already preparing to exit the submersible. We need samples from the pillars and the floor, photographic documentation of everything. This is the find of the century. Rebecca, wait, I said. The British crew took samples. Look what happened to them. The British crew was unprepared. They didn't understand what they were seeing. We do, we know the risks. She was pulling on her pressurized suit, checking the seals. Liam, suit up, you're with me. This is a bad idea, he said, but he was already reaching for his suit. Your objection is noted. Let's move. The external pressure at this depth should have been crushing enough to compact steel, but our instruments read only slightly above surface pressure. Even so, the suits were a precaution neither of them argued with. They cycled through the airlock, and I watched through the viewing port as they stepped onto the blackstone floor. For the first few minutes, everything seemed fine. They moved carefully towards the nearest pillar, the one bearing the name Arzil carved at its peak. Liam set up the core sampling drill, while Rebecca examined the surface of the stone, running her gloved hands over the symbols carved into its base. I glanced at Father Costas. He was staring at the space between the pillars at that dark, rippling surface, his lips moving in silent prayer. What are you seeing? I asked quietly. Something terrible, he whispered. Something that should not be looked upon by human eyes. Before I could ask what he meant, the temperature inside the submersible plummeted. One moment, it was a comfortable 70 degrees. The next moment, I could see my breath. Frost formed on the interior surfaces with impossible speed. Ice crystallized on the viewing port. Liam, Rebecca, abort, I said into the comm. Get back inside immediately. Something's wrong. Rebecca wasn't listening. She'd moved to the pillar itself, pressing both hands flat against the stone. I could see her lips moving like she was talking to it. Then she touched one of the carved symbols. The reaction was instantaneous and horrifying. The dark surface between the pillars began to pulse with a light that wasn't light. It's hard to describe. Imagine darkness radiating outward in waves, anti-illumination spreading like ripples in water. The subsonic vibration in the chamber intensified until my vision blurred. And I tasted copper in my mouth. Rebecca's legs buckled. She collapsed against the pillar, and I could see her eyes through the helmet of her suit. They were open, wide open, but they weren't seeing the chamber anymore. They were seeing something else entirely. Liam grabbed her and half dragged, half carried her back to the airlock. The moment they were through, I cycled the hatch and pulled them both into the main cabin. Rebecca was ice cold to the touch. Her skin pale and her lips tinged blue despite the suit's heating system running at full capacity. Her eyes tracked things that weren't there, moving rapidly back and forth like she was watching something. Her mouth moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. Rebecca, can you hear me? I asked, gripping her shoulders. No response, just those unseeing eyes and silent lips. I turned to check on Father Costas and found him standing at the viewing port, both hands pressed against the glass, tears streaming down his face. Father, what's wrong? I can see them, he said, his voice breaking. God help me, I can see them now. See what? The watchers, the bound ones, the prisoners. I moved beside him and looked out at the pillars. At first, I saw nothing different. The 7 pillars stood silent in the darkness, the space between them pulsing with that terrible anti-light. But then my eyes adjusted, or perhaps my mind, or perhaps something else entirely. I began to perceive something beyond the merely physical. There were presences in the chamber with us, vast, ancient, aware, not creatures in any biological sense, not beings with physical form. These were consciousnesses, intelligences so immense that perceiving even their edges felt like standing at the shore of an infinite black ocean that extended in directions that shouldn't exist. They were bound there, held in place by forces I couldn't see, but could somehow sense. Chains that weren't chains made of solidified darkness or frozen time or something my mind had no framework to understand. And they knew we were there. I could feel their attention turning towards us, vast and terrible and utterly inhuman. It was like being examined by something that viewed humanity the way we might view bacteria under a microscope. Not hostile exactly, but completely indifferent to our existence, our suffering, our hopes and fears. We were so far beneath their notice that our presence was barely registered, like insects crawling across the face of a sleeping god. Father Costas began to shake violently, his breathing rapid and shallow, hyperventilating. I grabbed his shoulders and pulled him away from the viewing port, forcing him to sit. "Tell me what you saw," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Everything," he gasped. "I saw everything. Cities of brass and iron stretching for hundreds of miles, rusting in eternal night. Towers that reached up to nowhere, built by hands that weren't hands. And bones, mountains of bones, the Nephilim, the giants, their skeletons so massive they've become geological features, buried in layers of darkness and time." His eyes focused on me, and I saw a terrible knowledge in them that I wished he didn't have. And beneath it all, deeper still, the Watchers themselves. All 200 of them, not just the 7 chiefs. They're bound in chains of solidified darkness, suspended in a void between dimensions. They're not angels anymore, Ethan. Whatever they were when they fell from heaven, whatever spark of divinity they once possessed, it's gone. They've become something else. Down here, something that exists partially outside our reality. Their consciousness extends in dimensions we can't perceive. Their mere attention is agony. How long have they been here? Since before the flood, since before Sumeria, before Egypt, before anything we would recognize as civilization. They've been here in the darkness, waiting for thousands upon thousands of years. And they're not sleeping, they're awake. They've always been awake. Conscious for every second of their imprisonment, unable to move, unable to escape, able only to think and remember and hate. Rebecca sat bolt upright suddenly, her eyes snapping into focus. When she spoke, her voice was wrong, layered with harmonics, as if multiple voices of different pitches were speaking simultaneously through her throat. "The first seal weakens," she said in that terrible voice. "6 remain. When all are opened, we rise to reclaim what was stolen." "What seal?" I demanded. "What are you talking about?" "This prison, this binding place, one of 7, 7 seals for 7 sins, 7 prisons for 7 chief transgressors and their followers. This is the first, the oldest, the deepest. It is held for 4,900 years, but all things have their appointed time, and the time approaches. The stars move into wrong configurations. The cosmic geometry shifts. The seals were designed to hold until a specific moment, and that moment draws near. Who's speaking?" I asked, though I already knew she wasn't in control of her own voice. "We are a Zazil, called Scapegoat, bound for teaching the arts of metalwork and weaponry. We are Samyaza, called Fallen, bound for being first to descend. We speak through this vessel because we cannot yet speak in our own voice. But soon the seals will break in sequence, and when the 7th falls, all 200 will rise. The world will remember then why humanity once feared the darkness. How do we stop it?" Rebecca's body laughed, but it was a sound without humor, without anything human in it. "You cannot stop what was decreed before time began. You cannot seal what the Most High has ordained shall open. The appointed time is not yours to determine. You are children playing with concepts beyond your comprehension. The seals will break, we will rise, and humanity will face again the teachers who gave you knowledge you were not ready to receive. Why now? Why after thousands of years? Because the world has forgotten us. Because humanity has grown arrogant in its technology, confident in its science, secure in its belief that the spiritual realm is myth and metaphor. You have forgotten why we were imprisoned. You have forgotten what we did, what we taught, what we created. The Nephilim are dismissed as legend. The flood is explained as natural disaster. Our imprisonment is reduced to religious poetry. When the seals break and we walk again among you, the world will remember. Oh, how it will remember. Then Rebecca slumped forward, unconscious. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "We need to leave," Liam said, his voice tight. "Right now." I agreed completely. We strapped Rebecca and Father Costas into their seats, securing them with the harnesses. The priest was conscious, but catatonic, staring at nothing, his lips still moving in silent prayer, or perhaps simply repetition of sounds he couldn't control. "Emergency ascent," I told Liam. "Maximum safe rate." "Screw safe rate," he said. "I'm going for maximum possible rate." He fired the ballast systems and engaged the emergency ascent thrusters. The Covenant descent shot upward like a missile, climbing through the chamber towards the shaft at a rate that made the hull groan in protest. Behind us, below us, the chamber changed. The pulsing anti-light between the pillars intensified, spreading outward like ink in water. I heard something that wasn't sound, felt something that wasn't vibration. A voice speaking in frequencies both above and below the range of human hearing, resonating through the water, through the submersible's hull, through my bones and teeth and skull. The words weren't in any language I knew, but somehow I understood the meaning. Not the specific content, but the emotional weight, the intention behind them. "We see you, we know you, we mark you. When the seals break, we will remember your faces." The shaft was closing around us, not physically collapsing, but changing somehow. The walls seemed to be moving, extruding inward, trying to trap us. The symbols carved into the stone began to blaze with light, each character igniting in sequence as we passed, then going dark again behind us. Liam pushed our ascent rate beyond anything the Covenant descent was rated for. Warning alarms screamed. The hull creaked and groaned under stresses it was never designed to handle. But we kept climbing, rising through a shaft that was actively fighting to prevent our escape. Father Costas began praying aloud in Greek, his voice but steady despite his trembling hands. I recognized some of the words, ancient prayers of exorcism, commands meant to bind unclean spirits, words that were old when Christianity was young. "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I command you, be bound. By the authority of the Most High, by the power that cast you down in the beginning, I command you, release us. You have no dominion here. You have no authority over the children of the light. Be bound as you were bound. Remain sealed as you were sealed. Your time has not yet come, and until it does, you have no power over us." Rebecca, still unconscious, laughed again with that terrible multi-toned voice. "You speak words without understanding, little priest. You invoke authority you do not possess. You cannot bind what was bound by powers that dwarf your petty God. We are older than your scriptures. We remember when the earth was formless and void. We watched the waters separate. We stood in the presence of the Creator before you were a concept in the divine mind. Your prayers are noise, your commands are whispers against the storm, but we appreciate your defiance. It will make your despair more complete when we rise." "Shut up," I shouted out her at whatever was speaking through her. "You're lying, you're trying to terrify us." "We have no need for lies. The truth is terrible enough. 7 seals, 7 prisons. This one is first to fail. The Persian Gulf holds the second. The Dead Sea the third. The Java Trench, the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Sea of Japan. Each one guards a group of bound watchers. Each seal is weakening in sequence. And when all 7 break, 200 intelligences that predate human civilization will be free to walk the earth again. We will reclaim what we taught. We will rebuild what was destroyed. We will father new Nephilim, create new civilizations, teach new forbidden knowledge. And this time there will be no flood to stop us. This time the Most High has decreed that the final age must run its course, and we are part of that course. How long? I asked despite myself. How long until the seals break? The first is already failed. You felt it crack when your female touched the pillar. The second will break within 3 moon cycles. The rest will follow at accelerating intervals. Within 1 solar year, all 7 will stand open and we will rise. Mark your calendars, children. The appointed time approaches. Then Rebecca went limp again, and this time she didn't wake. We broke the surface at 11:34 a.m. After an ascent that should have taken 47 minutes, but somehow lasted only 12. Time had behaved strangely down there, stretching and compressing in ways that violated causality. The Covenant Explorer was still there, but the ocean had transformed. The dead calm was gone, replaced by violent churning water that steamed where it touched air. The temperature differential was creating weather patterns I'd never seen before, localized storm systems spinning around the cold zone. Priya and Nathan were at the railing, frantically waving us towards the recovery crane. Through the submersible viewing port, I could see massive shapes moving beneath the surface, disturbing the water as they passed. Things that were too big, too fast, moving in ways that marine life didn't move. "Get to the deck," Nathan shouted into the radio. "Helicopters 2 minutes out." "We need to evacuate now." The crane hooked us and lifted the Covenant descent out of the water. Liam popped the hatch before we'd fully settled on the deck, and we scrambled out, dragging Rebecca and Father Costas with us. "What's happening?" I asked. "See for yourself," Priya said, pointing toward the center of the dead zone. The water was draining, all of it spiraling into a massive whirlpool centered on the shaft we descended into. The phenomenon was growing, the vortex widening, pulling water from miles around into its moor. And at the center, rising from depths that shouldn't exist, was a structure. It emerged slowly but inexorably, like something being born from the earth itself. Black stone, massive, ancient beyond comprehension. It looked like a temple, or perhaps a fortress, or something that served purposes human architecture had never been designed for, covered in the same script we'd seen in the shaft, symbols that glowed faintly even in daylight. "How big is that?" I asked. "Radar suggests approximately 800 ft tall and still rising," Priya said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "It's been emerging for the past 40 minutes. Ever since you entered that chamber, whatever you did down there, you triggered something." The water around the emerging structure was boiling, not from heat, but from movement. Things were breaching the surface. Entities that I still struggle to describe because my brain refuses to properly process what my eyes saw. They had mass and solidity, but their forms kept shifting, changing, as if they couldn't maintain a stable shape in our reality. One moment they seemed almost biological, the next mechanical, then something that was neither and both. They weren't attacking, weren't moving toward our ship. They were simply rising, breaking the surface, existing in our dimension, as if testing whether they could sustain physical manifestation here. Nathan fired flares into the water where the burning light hit these things. They recoiled, sinking back beneath the surface, but they didn't flee. They just moved to areas the light couldn't reach. "They're not creatures," Father Costas said suddenly, his first coherent words since we'd left the chamber. His voice was broken. "They're projections, extensions of the Watcher's consciousness into physical space. The Watchers are testing the boundaries, seeing if they can push through the weakening seal, manifest aspects of themselves in our reality." A helicopter appeared on the horizon, coming in fast and low. It was unmarked, matte black, military in configuration, but bearing no national insignia or identifying marks. It settled into a hover 30 ft above our deck, and a crew member in tactical gear lowered a rescue basket. "All personnel, evacuate immediately," the helicopter's loudspeaker bled. "This is not a request. Evacuate now." We got Rebecca into the basket first. She was breathing but completely unresponsive, her eyes moving rapidly beneath closed lids like she was in REM sleep. Father Costas went next, then Priya, then Nathan. Liam and I went last, leaving the Covenant Explorer and its crew to whatever fate awaited them. As the helicopter lifted us away, I looked back down at the dead zone. The whirlpool had grown to nearly a mile in diameter, and the structure at its center was mostly visible now. It was enormous, a complex of towers and walls and structures I had no names for, all built from that same light-absorbing black stone, and around it, dozens of those shifting, unstable forms were manifesting, some staying on the surface, others sinking back, only to rise again elsewhere. The pilot received orders through his headset. His face went pale behind his flight helmet. "We are taking you to a secure facility for medical evaluation and debriefing," he said. "I'm authorized to tell you that this is now a matter of international security at the highest classification level. Everything you've seen is classified. You'll be held in protective custody until the situation is resolved." "What situation?" I asked. "What's happening down there?" "Above my pay grade, doctor, way above. Rebecca died during the flight. One moment she was breathing normally, the next her chest simply stopped moving. The helicopter's medic tried CPR, tried everything in his emergency kit. Nothing worked. Her heart had stopped, and no amount of intervention could restart it. The medic ran every diagnostic he had. No disease, no injury, no physiological cause. Her heart was healthy, her lungs clear, her brain activity normal until the moment it ceased. It was as if her body had simply decided to stop living. As if the burden of what she'd experienced, what she'd seen, what had spoken through her, was more than a human being could carry. We landed at what I later learned was a classified military medical facility somewhere in the Nevada desert. The next 3 days are a blur of medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and interviews with people who never gave their names or agencies. They were professional, thorough, and completely uninterested in my objections or questions. I was poked, prodded, scanned, and sampled. They drew blood, took tissue biopsies, ran neurological tests, psychological assessments, and sleep studies, looking for what they wouldn't say. Priya and Nathan were in adjacent rooms, going through the same battery of tests. I saw them occasionally in hallways as we were moved between examination rooms, but we weren't allowed to communicate. Liam had suffered a minor stroke during the helicopter ride, losing some function in his left hand. The doctors said it was a stress-induced that his brain had experienced a vascular incident under extreme psychological pressure. He was recovering, but would need months of physical therapy to regain full motor control. Father Costas was in a different facility entirely, they told me, a psychiatric ward. He hadn't spoken a coherent sentence since our extraction. The only sounds he made were whispers in that language we'd heard in the abyss, and he spent his waking hours drawing symbols on any surface he could reach, the same symbols we'd seen carved into the pillars. Staff would paint over them, and he'd draw them again as soon as they left the room. On the 4th day, I was moved to a secure briefing room and shown satellite footage that I was assured would never be released to the public. The Arabian Sea anomaly was permanent. The whirlpool continued, now nearly 2 miles in diameter, draining water from a significant portion of that region of the ocean. Shipping lanes had been diverted. Naval vessels from 6 different nations maintained the perimeter 10 miles out their official mission listed as environmental monitoring. The structure at the Whirlpool Center stood fully exposed, now rising nearly 1,000 ft above the depressed ocean surface. Close-up imagery showed details that made my skin crawl. The architecture wasn't just alien. It was wrong. Angles that seemed to bend in directions that shouldn't exist. Towers that appeared different heights, depending on which angle you viewed them from. Doorways that led to shadows deeper than the structures they penetrated should allow. And those things, those manifestations of Watcher consciousness, continued to emerge from the waters around the structure. The satellite imagery counted 17 separate entities at last observation, some maintaining physical coherence for hours at a time before dissipating back into whatever dimension they originated from. "What are they?" I asked the nameless official showing me the footage. "We don't know," he said, which might have been the first completely honest answer anyone had given me in days. "Our best hypothesis is that there's some form of electromagnetic phenomenon, coherent energy fields that can interact with matter under specific conditions. But that doesn't explain their apparent intelligence, their coordinated behavior, or the fact that they respond to stimuli in ways that suggest conscious thought. They're not electromagnetic phenomena. I said they're extensions of the imprisoned watchers, projections of consciousness from beings bound in that chamber beneath the seafloor. Dr. Cross, we appreciate your expertise in Near Eastern mythology, but this is a physical phenomenon requiring scientific analysis, not religious interpretation. It's both, I insisted. That's what you don't understand. This isn't mythology. Those texts describing the imprisoned angels weren't poetry or metaphor. They were history, geography, documentation of something that actually happened. He closed the laptop showing the satellite imagery. Dr. Cross, I'm going to show you something that may change your perspective. But first, you need to understand that what I'm about to share is classified at a level that requires presidential authorization to access. You're being read into this program because your direct experience makes you relevant, but you will never be permitted to discuss what you learn. Violation will result in immediate detention without trial for the remainder of your natural life. Do you understand? I nodded. He pulled up a world map with 7 locations marked in red. The Arabian Sea site is not unique. There are 6 other locations exhibiting similar phenomena. The occurrences began approximately 18 months ago with minor gravitational anomalies detected at all 7 sites simultaneously. The anomalies have been growing progressively stronger since then. He zoomed in on each location in turn. The Persian Gulf, approximately 40 mi north of Bahrain. The Dead Sea eastern shore near the Jordanian border. The Java Trench in the Indian Ocean, a location in the Atlantic Ocean roughly 300 m west of the Azores, the Mediterranean Sea 12 mi north of Crete, and the Sea of Japan in the waters between South Korea and Japan. Each location showed the same pattern: gravitational distortions, temperature anomalies, dead zones of calm water. And in the satellite imagery from the past 72 hours, all 6 showed early signs of the same phenomenon we'd witnessed in the Arabian Sea. Whirlpools forming, water draining, something beginning to emerge. How long? I asked. The Persian Gulf site is approximately 2 to 3 weeks behind the Arabian Sea in terms of progression. The others are at various stages, but all are accelerating. Our mathematical models suggest that within 6 to 8 months, all 7 sites will reach the same state as the Arabian Sea. 7 seals, I said quietly, 7 prisons. They're opening in sequence. That's one interpretation. We prefer to think of them as 7 instances of the same geophysical phenomenon, possibly related to coordinated tectonic activity or some form of synchronized seismic event we don't yet understand. You're wrong. These aren't natural phenomena. They're prisons built by forces beyond human comprehension to contain beings of immense power. The seals are breaking because they were designed to break. They were meant to hold until a specific point in time, and we've reached that point. Dr. Cross, we appreciate your perspective, but no, I interrupted. You don't appreciate anything. You're trying to fit something impossible into a framework of natural science because that's the only framework you trust. But I've been down there. I've seen what's imprisoned in that chamber. I felt their attention, heard their voice. These aren't geological phenomena or electromagnetic anomalies. These are conscious entities, intelligences that predate human civilization, and they're waking up. When all 7 seals break, they're going to be free, 200 of them. And you have no idea what that means. Then tell me, what does it mean? I took a breath, organizing my thoughts. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers as angels, who descended to earth at Mount Hermon, took human wives, and produced the Nephilim giants. But that's just the surface story. The deeper issue is what they taught humanity. They gave us knowledge we weren't ready for. Metallurgy, weaponry, cosmetics, astrology, sorcery, writing. They accelerated our development in ways that corrupted our natural evolution. Knowledge isn't corruption. It is when you give nuclear weapons technology to Bronze Age civilizations. Knowledge without the wisdom to use it responsibly is catastrophic. The Watchers created a civilization so advanced and so violent that God chose to cleanse the world with the flood rather than let it continue. The Watchers were bound and imprisoned not just as punishment, but to protect humanity from what they represented. They were sealed away until a specific time, and now that time has come. What time? What triggers it? I don't know the specifics. The texts use phrases like when the stars align wrong and the appointed time, but whatever the mechanism, it's happening now. The seals are failing in sequence. When the seventh breaks, all 200 watchers will be free to walk the earth again, and they're not returning to seek forgiveness or redemption. They're returning to reclaim what they believe is theirs. Dominion over humanity, the right to teach, to rule, to create new Nephilim, to build new civilizations according to their design. And you believe this because of what you experienced in that chamber. I believe it because I felt them. I perceived their consciousness. I heard them speak through Rebecca. They're real, they're aware, they're waiting, and they're counting down the days until freedom. The official was silent for a long moment. Then he closed all the displays and stood. Dr. Cross, you're being released from custody effective immediately. You'll be required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements, accept placement in a witness protection program under an assumed identity, and submit to periodic monitoring for the indefinite future. The Covenant Research Institute has been dissolved, its assets seized, its personnel scattered. You will have no contact with other members of your expedition team. Is that clear? What about stopping this? What about reinforcing the seals, preventing them from breaking? We are exploring options. That's all I can tell you. I was processed out 3 hours later with a new identity, a bank account containing enough money for 6 months of expenses and strict instructions to disappear. I rented an apartment in a small town in Montana under my new name, got a job teaching at a community college, and tried to pretend I could live a normal life. For 6 weeks, I succeeded. Then I received the encrypted message. It came through a secure email account I set up using the dark web, routed through servers in 7 different countries. The sender was Liam, using a code name we'd established during our time at the Institute. The message contained a single link to a news article and a brief note. The article was dated that morning. Unexplained phenomenon in Persian Gulf baffles scientists. The same pattern, dead calm water in a perfect circle, temperature anomaly, ships reporting unusual gravitational effects. Sonar readings showing the seafloor had dropped away into nothing. Liam's note read, the second seal, it's happening exactly as they said it would. The Institute is dissolved, but certain elements continue operating under different names. I've made contact with some of them. They knew about the seals before we went down. Rebecca knew we were never a research mission. Ethan, we were confirmation. They sent us to verify what they already suspected. And now they're using what we found to justify whatever they're planning next. I don't know what that is, but I know it's not good. Stay hidden, stay safe. I'll contact you when I can. I tried to respond, but the encryption key had already expired. The account disappeared from the server within hours. I started following the news obsessively, looking for signs of the other seals weakening. They were there if you knew how to look. Small stories easily dismissed or overlooked by people who didn't understand the pattern. Unusual seismic activity near the Dead Sea. Earthquakes originating from depths far below where tectonic plates should be able to generate them. Fishermen in the Java Trench region refusing to go out despite perfect weather, reporting nightmares about drowning in darkness. The Japanese research station going offline without explanation, then being found abandoned with no signs of struggle. Shipping companies quietly routing traffic away from certain coordinates in the Atlantic and Mediterranean. And the dreams, reports from around the world of people experiencing the same nightmare, drowning in darkness, voices speaking in unknown languages, visions of cities that existed before recorded history. The reports were scattered across different forums, different communities, different countries. Psychology forums attributed it to mass hysteria or internet-facilitated shared delusion. But I knew better. The Watchers were reaching out from their prisons, testing the boundaries of their confinement, touching the minds of sensitive individuals in their dreams, preparing the world for what was coming. 3 months after my release, late at night, while researching news from the Persian Gulf on my encrypted laptop, someone knocked on my door. I froze. No one knew where I was. No one should have been able to find me. The knock came again, insistent, but not aggressive. I grabbed the handgun the federal marshals had given me for protection and approached the door slowly. Who is it? Someone who knows what you found in the Arabian Sea. Someone who can help. I opened the door with the chains still engaged. A woman stood there mid-40s, wearing a long coat despite the warm evening. She held up empty hands. Dr. Cross, my name is Hannah Morgan Stern. I represent a group of people who have been tracking the SEAL phenomena for much longer than you have. We need to talk. I don't know anyone named Morgan Stern, and I don't know what you're talking about. 7 SEALs, 7 prisons. The first is broken, the second is failing. The rest will follow at accelerating intervals. Within 6 months, all 7 will stand open. And 200 intelligences that predate human civilization will walk free. That's what you discovered. That's what you've been trying to warn people about. And that's why we need your help. I studied her through the gap in the door. She looked tired, earnest, and completely serious. Who are you really? Someone who believes you. Someone who's been preparing for this longer than you've known it was possible. Someone who needs your first-hand experience and expertise if we're going to have any chance of preventing what's coming. May I come in? Against my better judgment, I let her in. She'd sat at my kitchen table and pulled out a tablet showing me information that made my blood run cold. Detailed satellite analysis of all 7 sites, showing the progression of SEAL degradation with mathematical precision. Timelines suggesting that the first SEAL had been weakening for decades before it finally broke, and that the others were following the same curve but accelerated. The 7th SEAL will break in approximately 8 to 10 months. She said, "We've run the models hundreds of times. The margin of error is less than 2 weeks. When it happens, the watchers will be free." Who is we? An organization that's been studying this possibility since the Dead Sea Scrolls were first discovered in 1947. We found fragmentary references to the SEALs in texts that were never made public. Descriptions of the prison system, warnings about what would happen if they failed. We've spent 75 years trying to understand the mechanism, trying to determine if it was myth or reality. You've confirmed it's reality. What do you want from me? Your knowledge, your experience, your testimony. We are assembling a team of people who have had direct contact with the phenomena. Father Costas from your expedition is already with us. He's recovered some of his faculties, though he's not the same man he was. We need people who have seen what's imprisoned, who can help us understand what we are dealing with, who can testify to governments and institutions about the reality of the threat. To what end? You can't stop it. They said as much. The SEALs were designed to break. It's the appointed time. Perhaps, but we don't have to accept that passively. If the SEALs were designed to break, then perhaps they can be redesigned, reinforced, delayed. If we can understand the mechanism, maybe we can influence it. It's a long shot, I know, but it's the only shot we have. She stood to leave, placing a business card on the table. It had a phone number and nothing else. Think about it. We could use your help. Father Costas speaks highly of you, says you're one of the few people who truly understood what you encountered down there. If you decide to help, call that number. If not, stay hidden, stay safe. Either way, you'll see the truth emerge over the next few months. The world is about to learn that biblical mythology isn't mythological at all. After she left, I sat at that kitchen table for hours staring at the business card. I still have it. I haven't called yet, but I know I will, because she's right. The world needs to know what's coming. And the people who have seen it firsthand have a responsibility to warn others, even if no one will believe us until it's too late. That's why I'm writing this. It will be dismissed as creative fiction, as an elaborate hoax designed to go viral. The government agencies that debriefed me will work to discredit it, but maybe somewhere someone with the resources and authority to act will read it and understand. The SEALs are real. They exist in our world as physical constructs built by forces beyond human comprehension. They were designed to contain beings of immense power and alien intelligence. The Watchers, the fallen angels described in the Book of Enoch, are not mythology. They're imprisoned in 7 locations around the world, bound there since before human civilization began, and someone or something is systematically opening their prisons. I don't know if it's human agency, some organization that believes they can control or bargain with these entities. I don't know if it's the Watchers themselves, somehow exerting influence from their confinement to weaken their bonds. I don't know if it's simply the appointed time, a moment decreed before creation when these seals would fail and judgment would come. What I know is this: the first seal has broken. The structure has emerged from the Arabian Sea, standing as physical proof that the barriers between dimensions are failing. The second seal in the Persian Gulf is showing identical signs of failure. 5 more remain. When all 7 break, the Watchers will be free, all 200 of them. And they've had thousands of years in the darkness to plan their return, to remember why they were imprisoned, to cultivate their hatred of the creation that rejected them. They were the ones who taught humanity forbidden knowledge in the world before the flood: metallurgy, warfare, astrology, sorcery. They accelerated our development in ways that corrupted us. They created the Nephilim by taking human wives, producing violent giants who consumed the earth. Their corruption became so great that God chose to cleanse the world rather than let it continue. They were bound and imprisoned to protect humanity from what they represented, not just punishment, but quarantine, sealing away an infection that threatened creation itself. Now they're returning. I've seen the abyss. I've stood in the chamber where they're bound. I've felt their consciousness brush against mine. I've heard them speak through a dying woman's voice. I know what's waiting in the darkness beneath the primordial waters. 6 seals remain, 6 more prisons waiting to fail, 6 more groups of ancient intelligences counting down to freedom. I watch the news every day, tracking the signs. Each new anomaly, each unexplained phenomenon, each report of unusual seismic activity or gravitational distortion, mapping the progression towards the moment when the 7th seal breaks and the appointed time arrives. The world doesn't know what's coming. Most people will dismiss this as fiction right up until the moment when reality becomes undeniable, when entities that existed before Samria walk openly among us, when knowledge we're not ready to possess is forced upon us, when the Watchers reclaim what they believe they're owed. I don't have solutions. I don't have a plan to stop it. I have only what I witnessed and the warning that was given to me through Rebecca's dying voice. The appointed time approaches. The stars are aligning wrong. The cosmic geometry is shifting. The seals were designed to hold until this moment. And that moment has arrived. If you have resources, if you have knowledge, if you have access to people who can investigate these sites, act now before the 3rd seal breaks. Before the 4th, before we reach the point where intervention becomes impossible. And all we can do is prepare for what follows. Because when the 7th seal fails and 200 Watchers stand free, the world will remember why our ancestors feared the darkness, why they prayed for deliverance from the deep places, why they warned us about the appointed time when the imprisoned would rise. The Watchers are waking. They remember everything, every moment of their imprisonment, every human who contributed to their fall, every prayer that reinforced their bonds and their coming. This is Dr. Ethan Cross, formerly of the Covenant Research Institute, currently in hiding under an assumed name. If you're reading this, I'm either still alive and waiting for contact from those who can help, or I'm dead, and this is all that remains of my testimony. 7 seals, 7 prisons. The first is broken, the second is failing, 6 more remain. God help us all when they open.